It's a mean old world. Try living by yourself. It's a mean old world. Try living by yourself. If you can't get the one you're loving, you got to use somebody else. I got the blues. I'm gonna pack my things and go. Yes, I got the blues. I'm gonna pack my things and go. 'Cause I guess you don't want me. I'm just an unlucky so-and-so. Sometime I wonder how can you love be so cold? Sometime I wonder how can you love be so doggone cold? Well, I know, yes, I know you don't love me, baby. You're in love with Mrs. So-and-so, whatever her name is.
All right. Let's turn this on. Hello, everybody. It is Red Band Trader on Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. If you want to get a hold of me on Twitter at Red Band Trader. And then if you want to learn more about using a systematic process and having an algo execute your orders, or no, I shouldn't say execute, tell you when to execute your orders, you can speak to my coach Simon. Give him an email trade, the letter N, wordperform@gmail.com. He's also at TradeNPerform on Twitter. And if you tell him that you found out about the room through me, he'll give you a 5-day free pass. You can check it out, see what you think, and decide if you want to join us in there, if it's for you. So that's the extent of the marketing of this video. If people have more questions, feel free to ask. But nobody's here to get a sales pitch, so we're going to jump right in here. So the first thing I want to show you before we go digging into the algo is what we were dealing with today on NQ. So let me just hide a few things. The indicators here are actually, I got a YouTube video about overlaying multiple indicators, and that's all this is. It looks complicated, but all it is just like a bunch of different ways to measure the same thing, like momentum basically, and then volume aggression. And it's there's a couple swing trade setups that I've been using for years with these indicators, but they are not precise enough to use for like futures trading at all. You wouldn't be able to have like a 10-point stop or anything. So I don't talk about them very much, but they do sometimes help me set up swing trades and get a sense for whether or not I think a level is going to hold. I wasn't going to talk about that, but if you want to, we can. For now, I'm just going to kind of hide that and just show you what we're dealing with. Had a nice bounce here when they weren't able to cross the voodoo range level. That's always kind of cool. You can see that back here, of course, the voodoo range levels were different, right? So I don't remember if this one might have been, I think it might have been like up here, so it couldn't close below the voodoo range level. And now the voodoo range shifted a week later, and we're doing, so it looked like this here. And now we've tapped the nearby VR level and bounced, which is, I mean, it's not necessarily a sign that it has to reverse all the way back, but it's usually a sign that it needs to rest. The trend needs to rest a bit. I unfortunately woke up this morning with calls because I had gotten into a setup that I didn't want to take with futures at the end of the day because I didn't know if I would have time to get it out before settlement. I didn't know if I'd hit my target before settlement. So I made the kind of cheeky decision to just take the trade, but take it with calls and just do it with like 2 contracts. So I woke up down like $300, which sort of sucked. But it happens, and it's that being wrong needs to be okay. Like you got to get over yourself. The frustrating thing for me was that it actually set up short, but not before it opened. And by the time we opened, this happened with this move occurred on news pre-market. So I already knew when we opened, the calls that I bought here, they were profitable at the end of the day, and I was like, you know what, this might stop out, but if we are kind of range bound, even if we swing below this low, we could easily come back up and swing above this high. So why even cover them? Like I said, it might not have been totally logical, but my thinking was that the only information I have is that we attempted to break out the high, and that we attempted to test below and bounce. So the trade was valid. It just got interrupted basically by these by the numbers that got released in the morning. And by the time this candle closed, which was again, if you look here, if we go to the 15-minute chart, so by the time pre-market, when those numbers came out and we made the retest of this value area low of the consolidation zone, and they just whacked it, especially coming after this test of the VPOC here. See this, how like the VPOC becomes resistance? That is classic. I've talked about it in a lot of my streams. It's not a secret. It's just the way markets work a lot of the times. And, it's not going to be a brick wall, but when you see once this closes, it doesn't matter that it's green, right? But if you see this, and they've rejected, especially if they weren't able to make it, all the way, all the way over to the value area high, like the opposite end of the fair value, like the value area, the fair value zone was not reached since this test, right? They didn't quite make it there. Then they gave up the VPOC, which obviously can be anywhere in here, right? But for now it's right here. And then came up, tagged it. Usually you're going to come back and test this low. You're not always going to leave the area, but sometimes you do. And so had I been willing to trade into the numbers, which I wasn't, and had I been awake this early, I would have. That is a trade setup that I'm willing to take, but I would have preferred to take it with puts, and it was pre-market. So even if I would have been awake, I probably wouldn't have done it with futures because the risk of just getting absolutely annihilated when the econ comes out is just too great with futures, and that's just not the way you want to start the day, in my opinion. So, but we did open here, and you can see we came up, we tagged the value area low of that consolidation zone, and it just couldn't go anywhere. My coach Simon in the room identified right away that like the price action was not conducive to trading the long side, and a lot of people in the room only trade to the long side. So the majority of the room actually switched to trading bonds today. Within the first, so sorry about that. Within the first 15 minutes, the majority of all the long only traders in my trading room had already identified that NQ and ES are not going to cooperate. So I mean, if you're trading short, you can still participate, but like if you're not willing to short, and a lot of people, the only reason that people in the room don't short, to be honest, is because when it's a lot easier to be consistent if you just pick a direction and go with that direction. And a lot of people with the short side, it can become very tilting when you get it wrong. It's hard to explain, but if you're gonna pick one way or the other, the long-sided trades are just easier to set up, and picking one direction or another is usually a good idea if you have any trouble at all with consistency. If like you don't always follow your plan, which is like most of us, right? And if you catch yourself like going back to bad habits and things like that, the very first thing you should do is just cut to long only. And you're going to see, once you take out of your brain the idea that this might turn around and flip all the way, like if you're trading this, right? And you're struggling, like trying to short this, the easiest thing you can do for yourself is just say, you know what, I'm not going to short anymore today. I'm just going long only. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, hold on. I see what I'm doing here. There's momentum. There's no way this is coming back. I just need to get long, right? You sometimes don't see that early if you are focused on going back and forth. Whereas those traders who only pick one direction, and particularly those who trade only long, but you can do it short too. It's just harder. Even in a bear market, it is. There are setups that work. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just most people are probably better off long only. But I do know traders who do short only. In fact, some in the room are short only. So I'm not saying it can't be done. It's just it's a minority. But if you're long only, you're gonna see this setup so much clearer, and not give it all back trying to find the top. That's kind of the idea, is like it's just going to make life easier on you. Now, that being said, I am not one of the traders who trade one direction, it's not because I think I'm better than everybody or anything like that. It's just that I struggle more so. I will go to one direction when I see momentum going in one direction like this, right? So once I've identified the direction, I do go unidirectional. But what I'm willing to do, which is sometimes to my detriment, right? I do get caught in the traps I was talking about before, but I don't fight this ever, right? I'm not allowed to fight that. So if the market's starting to do this, I am long only. But there are times where I can switch to short only, such as when like the long setups aren't working. Not that they aren't setting up, but they're literally not working. Usually flipping to the opposite direction is a pretty good strategy. And I've been doing this for long enough that I've gotten like comfortable, I guess I could say. I'm not expert level or anything, but I've gotten comfortable with identifying when I need to shift. And so giving myself the freedom to go either direction, but insisting that I choose which direction that is seems to work better for me than going into the day and saying, no matter what I see today, I'm only taking longs. It's just that's actually a lot harder for me than and part of the reason I think is also because I don't trade the other markets. I am a little bit ADD, and it's really tough for me to multitask. I'm also a little bit older than most of you guys, and it's really hard for me to multitask. I don't focus well on multiple things going on at once, and I'm aware of that. And because of that awareness, I have a trap that I tend to set for myself, where I try to watch everything at the same time, and then I identify that I missed something really obvious, and I'll tilt because of it. So because I know that I'm susceptible to that, rather than watching multiple markets at the same time, what I'm trying to do is do my homework, decide ahead of time which market I want to trade, and then just trade that. Rather than trying to watch UB and ZB and GC and CL and RTY and, you know, like, it's just, I'm just not that good at that, right? Like, some people are amazing multitaskers. They can zero in right away as soon as they see the setup, nail it, and then switch to the other one, right? If you can do that, you've got a great skill that will come in handy trading, right? If you can't do that, it doesn't mean you can't trade well. It just means that you're going to be doing a lot more. You need to figure out a way to, like, accept that you won't always be participating. It's one reason why a lot of traders prefer things like equities or equity options, as well as like Forex. Is if you're really good at just like sifting through a big waiting list and just picking out one setup and looking for it, that's a great skill, right? It's just not something I'm very good at. So instead, what I like to do is I'll look at all the I know which setups apply to each market that I trade, and I'll look at all the charts early on and I'll decide, do I have opportunity here or not? And then choose which market looks like it's got the best opportunity for me today. And no, I'm allowed to change that, but once I change that, I'm not going back and looking, I'm not like leaving like multiple charts up on different monitors of different, like I might glance at ES or the bonds, like I'm not saying I never look at them, but I'm not looking at them intending to trade them. I'm looking at them for hints on general market direction only, not on looking for trades. I pick which market I'm going to trade early in the day, and then only if I change that, like I said, then I'm shifted. So like that's just the way that works for me. I'm not saying that's something you need to do, but early on, my thinking was, since we got this rejection and the drop, my thinking at first was I should be I thought I would have opportunities in NQ. I thought it looked like it might work. What I didn't anticipate is I thought that even though this set up beautifully, right? Like I said, it does not always leave the area. And so my first inclination here was actually to try to get it to come back. And it's just what I call fancy trading. I wanted it to be long, and the room was trying to get along, and it was right at the open, and to be honest, I should not have participated because I had already identified the short setup that I had missed, but I was holding those calls, and I think there was a part of me that said, you know, my initial idea with the setup, the long setup that I took the previous day, right, was that this low can get tested, but unless we leave the area, we're probably going to be shopping until there's some sort of change in behavior. And a lot of times, changes in behavior are identifiable by like price action changes. And a big one is speed. And so initially, when we started the day, I'll tell you, I know where I got this wrong, but here's how my thinking went. When we opened, so again, we set up here. You can't see the lines here because it's too small, but we dropped through it, right? But the low of yesterday, let me just mark it. So this is the area that I was like, hey, if we can get a trap off that low and it actually sets me up, I could technically travel all the way back through here as long as it's not super bearish. And my thinking at the time was, it's not super bearish unless I see some sort of price action shift. So, you can't see the, This is actually a doji. Here, hold on. Yeah, I didn't realize that having that line there makes the wick invisible. That's annoying. I wish I could. I wonder if I can turn that off. Well, whatever. So when it opened, and it's a little hard to see, I guess, on the candlestick chart, but on the algo, here I'll show you on the algo. On the algo, it was here. Back up to 8:30 Central, which is 9:30 on the trading view charts, but 8:30 on the algo. So we opened here, right? And again, if you're new to this, this is the 24 tick where I'm looking for most of my trades to set up, or I should say to execute, right? To trigger. And then I've got the 15 tick, which I'm allowed to take trades on, but only in the direction of the trend, and only when I have reason to believe that I won't get set up here, such as when there's a lot of momentum. But also, if it's going too fast, I can't take it because I won't be able to process the information fast enough to see the setup, set my orders, and manage the setup, right? So this is primarily just for getting reads. And then this is the 8 tick, and the only thing, I don't take any trade setups from the 8 tick, but I do monitor how the trade setups that do trigger on the 8 tick are doing. So, for instance, when you have a box, if you want to learn more about the individual setups, you can check out my streams from like the previous couple days. I've went pretty in depth into a couple of these. So, but when you have a box, normally what you would expect is the wick of that box should be support or resistance. The yellow boxes, this wick should be resistance, and they should reject out of here to continue the trend, assuming that the box shows up in the direction of the trend. So what you would expect is that the next triangle down, if it shows up here, is probably going to give you a trade entry. I'm not talking about the triangle down that comes out. If it comes on the very next bar, it's only valid if you're not consolidating. For instance, if you're sweeping through a big range and it shows up like during that kind of action, when it's consolidating like this or chopping, you cannot take them as a trade trigger. It's the beginning of a more complex setup. So the natural setup for this, if you were trading this this time frame, is when I see the yellow box, wait for a pullback. If they reject this and put in a triangle down, it's usually good to go. And then oftentimes if you get an orange bar or a star to the downside, which are yellow, you sometimes don't even need to wait for the triangle. Those are usually good too. Well, in this case, you can see we never got any of those. We got an X, which is a different setup. And then that X got beat by a star X divergent bar with a blue dot. So this bar here with all of these signals is really strong, particularly when it comes against the trend like this, and they're not like defending a level. See that? It's not down here where like it sort of makes sense to see that, like they're if they're really trying to defend a level, like here. I'll show you. So if you're falling and there's a level, it makes sense to get an aggressive buyer and divergence to show up here, even if you're not bullish, because buyers who bought this are going to try to defend their buy. So you don't just want to buy it because you see those signals, especially on the 8 tick, but all the same logic still applies in a very small window of price. But this is not a buy signal because it's not bullish, right? And seeing it here, it should not freak me out at all if I'm short, because it makes sense that they would try to defend it. As long as sellers follow through, it's cool, right? So, and that would be the same thing if it showed up down here, because we had a support, and then if they came down here, tested that support, and gave an aggressive buyer, that kind of makes sense. But when you can't get under it, they get volume here and a volume shift, which is the green, but no stars and no divergent dots, so no one trapped really, right? But then they show up with that up here. And so that was kind of surprising. and so those, if you're aware of these kind of little nuances, you can see that like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense if this is bearish, right? So once you know that, like I said, I'm not suggesting that I should buy because the 8 tick triggered something. It's too fast and too small to make trading decisions, but I know that this condition is not bearish. So it doesn't mean that the higher time frame has to reverse, which is what I need to remember. Because sometimes that does, like, it gets me excited that there's going to be a reversal, and I'll start hunting longs on the higher time frame, which is basically what happened today. But what it does mean is that the bears probably need some rest, right? Momentum's not increasing. So, like I said, because of my slight bias, right, of yesterday buying calls at the end of the day, thinking it has a possibility of continuing to chop, and then if I hold those calls, they'll probably return and run through that fair value I showed earlier. Even though I knew that the econ was bearish and the price action looked bearish, in the back of my mind I was like, if it's gonna bounce, this is where it's got to happen. And then I saw that and I was like, well, if they can trap some sellers down here and bounce, I suppose I can give it a try. And to be fair, my coach agreed with me. So it's not that it's wrong. It was just, well, I mean, it was wrong, but it was logical, but it didn't consider the fact that I had higher time frame information that could have identified that it wasn't as high of an odds trade as I thought it was. So the trade itself shows up here when it's right. Is it right here? Is it the apex trap off that? I think there's no apex there. 8:30. Oh, I'm on the wrong day. This is Tuesday. I'm like, that's not a trap. Okay. I was on the wrong day. Oh, hi, cat. My apologies. Still applies, though. Similar situation here. Let me show you. I was on the wrong day. Wednesday. So similar situation, right? We're falling through a known support, right? But when we opened, there wasn't a lot of momentum, which is kind of weird. Like when you're breaking through support, especially after like econ news, you'd expect some higher time frame participants. But it also wasn't going up. It was just kind of hanging out. It took a long time to sort of develop this move. And so I'm like, okay, I know it looks bearish on the higher time frame, but if I can get some kind of hint that things are not so bearish anymore, maybe I can find a trade setup. So I ended up taking this practically out of the gate within 2 minutes, which is unusual for me, right? I can do it, but I'm only supposed to do it if I have a clear read. I was a little influenced by like where my focus was. Like I was specifically looking for this reversal, even though like I had really no reason to think it was going to set up. But the other thing that kind of got me was right at the open here, right on the smaller time frame. If you look, there was oops, sorry, that is the trap. So this is the open here. Here is this is the open, right? So right on the open, they were already oversold. And so I had kind of marked off like this low here, the overnight low, right? We broke right through it, came back up and tried to test it, and we couldn't, right? So at first I was like, well, that's a pretty bearish open, right? This was pretty much within a minute, right? But then we got this pink bar at the low with a star on it and a speed bar, and all of a sudden, and a momentum shift, and all on this tiny little 8 tick. I shouldn't be buying it, but all of a sudden I'm like, well, if this gets defended, if it's gonna bounce, that's where it's gonna have to be. Let's see if I have any more evidence that these sellers might have gotten a little bit overzealous, right? So I watched this rip right through that overnight low,
and give a aggression signal. And then I'm like, well, what I should have thought is, since they've put in this aggression signal above this previous support, which was resistance, right? If they give this up, it's probably not going to bounce any higher than overnight low. I didn't think of that, but that was the hint that I missed. Instead, what I was focused on, rather than thinking about this like a trap door setup, which is where it could have been bullish, but they needed so much aggression up here that anybody who shows up here is likely to get trapped. So they try, see this? Divergence. They try with volume. They tried to trap them, and they got star, X, speed trap, and a dot. And that's just way too much aggression to fight. So they all gave up, right? Right here on the 8-tick, I should have been like, you know what? Even if this trap that's setting up on the higher time frame, even if this works, it's probably not going to break that overnight low. That should have been my thought, right? I did have the information. I just wasn't focused on it correctly. Instead, I was thinking, well, this didn't hold, but it's such a small time frame that it doesn't matter, right? Was my thinking. And then we got aggression signal there. So I was like, well, that's potentially someone who could get trapped, right? And so that's where my focus was really all we have to do is trap this guy now. I was thinking about this in reverse, right? They set up on this time frame. It's not a perfect setup, but it's okay. The rings often do, especially with volume, often do create on a second low, like a double bottom or just a higher low or whatever. They do often create some reversals, but you do need the triangle in this case to confirm it. And they don't get any follow through. And it shouldn't be a huge shock. But you see what happened here? They came up on this tiny little time frame and they did break through this guy. Right? So at the time I was like, this could work. And so on the dip, I took the trade. And so I didn't take it right here, but I took it like here. And I should have waited for this one to confirm because that's where I was looking. And I should have noticed that this yellow dot is going to be huge resistance, even if we do make it up there. But most likely this low is resistance already, this overnight low. And what do you know? That's exactly where they were banging their head on. They test up there with a pink bar that I call a mini bar. It doesn't have a wick, or it has a very small wick. And if they can't push anybody higher than that, what I know is that supports are not necessarily going to be defended. They do it again. Still a mini bar. Tests above, volume shift above, aggression below. This looks like a short setup if they can give you a triangle down. Right there. That is the short. Because the location is right. But like I said, it's a very small time frame. So, oh shit, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. That's not what I meant to do. I meant to erase the lines. But this thing has moved. So, unfortunately, I took a stop that was probably unnecessary. I should have been able to identify that, but it was happening so fast. That's part of this problem of trading in the morning. Is this occurred so quick? Wednesday, right here. This all happened within 2 minutes, right? So I didn't have any time to think about this. I was just like, yellow dot, get above yellow dot, we should be good. And it did. It did get above the yellow dot with the VPOC. And it did become support, right? So on this tiny little time frame, it makes sense what I was thinking. The problem is that on the bigger time frame, that's resistance. And I'm trading right into it. And so because of that, I should have been looking for shorts. And the short is right here on the triangle. Then the other thing I didn't see is, had I just been a little bit patient and waited for this triangle up that never showed up, it followed through with a box down. And again, remember, the regular trade for that is look for this to hold and you can usually get a short. But it was going very slow. Price action was like inching along, right? So at that point, on the 8 tick, I had already gotten a box down. So I should have already been thinking, this is where I want to be short, is up there on a test up, right? They couldn't get up there. Of course, what my mind was focused on is that these were all purple. So I thought they might be able to rip through it, which again, if you're trading with the trend is probably true, but in this case, you're not. So this low is technically not defeated until you get a bar that's not purple below it. And on this time frame, that doesn't occur until all the way down here. So here's where you know you're pretty much effed. And on the medium time frame, this is the entry, basically here, and this is the stop, right? And you're trying to get this double bottom to work, but it should be crystal clear that this low was rejected. Unfortunately, on this time frame, I did get above a mini bar, so my thinking was I might get a buyer showing up here. The problem is that this low can get tested before that occurs, so I really shouldn't have been confident because this was already a double bottom, and I don't really trade triple bottoms. So see how like this mini bar got tested above, and that makes this more likely to be supported. But again, only on this time frame. It just means it's likely to go to resistance. Well, resistance is right here at that dot. And if you look, bears lost this and reclaimed it, which I talked about yesterday. They lost it right here, which means that green bar triangle up is usually good to go. See that? But then and it was, this green bar triangled up did give you like 6 points or whatever. It just ran into resistance. And the fact that they reclaimed it here, it's over. I need to look at whether or not the arrows might come in handy here, or if it just needs to be a triangle down. But I've seen this before where you reclaim a dot after losing it. So they give it away, reclaim it, and reject it with an arrow. It may be consistent. I just don't know, right? So another example would be this dot here, this yellow dot here. Got beat. So if they reclaim it and they print a yellow dot on the after a retest of that area, so they go under, come back up, and reject with an arrow down, it might actually be a good short. So you do get the dot. This stopped me out of my trade and shook me up a bit because I was like, what am I doing? It's 5 minutes into the day and I'm already down to stop. And I added to the trade, which sucked. And I don't like it. But I'm trying to learn to add to the trade, and when it pulls back into my stop, and I shouldn't have done it. But here's what my thinking was, which is awful. This box usually produces a lift that then gets rejected, and so I was like, well, I can ride the lift back out and maybe get out for break even, which is awful thinking. And it's like if I add here, maybe I can get a lift, right? That's not the way I should be trading. That was a mistake. And it was so early in the morning to make that mistake. I was just like, oh my God, that's so gross. So again, on the tiny little time frame, these boxes, it already can't get up there. That's bearish, right? Just drops down and becomes resistance. That should have given me a hint that this box probably wasn't going to be able to retrace. It's actually very bearish. The trouble is that the price action was so damn slow for the open. This usually takes 3 microseconds. And it took 5 minutes. So I was influenced by the price action and thought it might still bounce, right? And then, so I didn't short it or anything, but I was like, yeah, this doesn't look all that strong in my mind, but the truth is this resistance is strong. Even though it's not, the price action was slow, the resistance is still significant. So you can't take longs. I did identify that once this stopped out, and once this rejected, because the dot, this dot on the, like, this is why I'm using the 15 tick and the 8 tick, is because I see things like this. This dot, and it works when it's with the trend. This dot gets taken, reclaimed, rejected, right? That's bearish. And what I really wanted, well, I got the dot here. But see how it apex trapped on this time frame? It got behind this this little purple flag here. It's hard to see because there's a dot in the front of it, but it came up and it produced a star down. That is a very strong trade when you're with the trend, that apex trap. And what I'm finding is that it's particularly good when this has a dot, or when you're at highs, at resistance. Basically, that's what it is. It basically just works well when you're at resistance. I don't know if I should have, if it was a good idea to take it, because this was technically support, but bigger time frame said even though price action was slow, we're probably going to take this out, right? And then smaller time frame here, you have a dot. It was beat. It was reclaimed. Triangle down usually takes you out, right? Specifically because it retested, triangle down, right? So that's already telling. I'm not going to take that trade because it's on the 8 tick, but that's basically telling me we're probably going down further. The other thing that was clear here, well, should have been, is that this X up, right there. That getting beat is a problem. Once you get under this low, with a bar that's not purple in particular, and especially when they print another X after this one and this one, the bears are clearly in control, because these X bars shouldn't be all that strong. They're very susceptible to being trapped when you're going contra, like this. See, so X at the low gets squeezed. That's very normal. X's at the lows are dangerous. X down. X up at the highs and resistance are dangerous for bulls, right? So when you get over this, it's usually a squeeze. So X down followed by a blue dot on a mini bar is usually immediate push. Of course, it's a tiny little time frame, so I wouldn't have been able to do that. I wouldn't have been able to process that, but that's the setup there. But then on the opposite direction, you have X down, X up, and now if this gets broken, it's done. Because the blue X is now trapped, and so anything up now, it can even come back over here and retest, and you just want to sit there and nail it, right? They put an X down here, so you got to watch out for them to squeeze this. If you get a blue, now it's counter trend, but if you get a blue dot aligned with that, it can squeeze back up again. And so now all of a sudden you got this situation where it's like, well, I want to short from up here, but if they break this, it might squeeze, right? And that kind of sucks. Not surprisingly, they don't break it. There's the arrow I was looking for. So see the sideways arrow? And what I'm wondering is when yellow dots, specifically after losing them and coming back and reclaiming one like this, so in other words, when it's already bearish, are the yellow arrows a good entry, or do I need to wait for them to be trapped or tested like this? Is this a good entry? Like, I don't know. It seems like it sometimes works, particularly when you have a dot beat and then reclaim. See, look, dot, this little dot. Hi, Ronan. Got beat by a bar that's not pink right there. And so reclaiming that low, which is right here, getting a VPOC below that low right there, is usually a sign that it's resistance. We just have to reject off of it. They test back into it and reject. And so like what I'm seeing is that arrows like this tend to show up here. Hi, you're being there? Yeah, I know. Arrows, so the sideways arrows tend to show up there a lot. I don't know if they're necessarily the trade entry, but I'm seeing, God, stop. He wants to play. So, yeah, there were definitely some hints on the smaller time frame from the beginning. Even though, if you see how choppy this is, I don't like this price action personally, where it's going down, but it's not like going anywhere. It's like chop, 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 test resistance, test support, chop, chop, chop. This is very, very difficult to trade if you're trying to trade it when it looks like this. It's just It's not worth it, particularly to the short side, because they can get reamed so easily. So the only way I'm allowed to trade something like this is A, the higher time frame clearly is going down, right? So even though it's chopping, it's going in the, it's like resolving in the direction that the higher time frame is. And then B, I need a resistance, a location to like campaign. And I can't chase breakouts, right? When it's slow like this, when the price action is choppy and slow. So the way to do this would have been identifying the resistance up here and attacking here, or identifying this resistance here after beating that, coming down and retesting it, and attacking here and here, right? That's how you do it. You don't short the X, right? On this time frame that I want to be trading, because the extensions are bigger, on this time frame, like I said, it looked like it might be bouncing here, but it didn't give us the triangle up. It gave us X down that it just immediately dumped. And so I was waiting for this resistance to be tested, and I was planning on shorting it. They tried to come up. They gave us the dot way low here, and you had to use the smaller time frame to identify that this was new resistance. It was right there. So it did signal. It just wasn't as high as I wanted it to be. See that? This did. Can I should be able to. I guess maybe I can't because I didn't draw it here. Hold on. Oh, I can. Okay. So see that line is right there, right? That is it. So that yellow dot coming after the box here is a good trade setup. I didn't want to take it because it looked like I was buying right into support, right? And I had a pink bar here that was a hammer, right? It has a wick, and we traded above it with VPOC on a bar that's not pink, meaning that usually this low gets defended. We may test below it, but usually they try to defend it. So I was like, I'm not gonna take it, right? And they did defend it, and then lost, right? So it wouldn't have gotten you long. There's no setup here, but I was using that. I was getting stuck on that bias of what if this is the spot that it bounces. Plus, there was a voodoo range level here, which did influence me thinking, if I'm going to short, why don't I just wait until they've traveled like past the VR? Because otherwise it might still be balanced, right? So I didn't really want to short here or here right into the voodoo range level when the PA was crappy. And I think that's okay, right? What you don't want to do is just buy, and then you're done for the day. Don't do that, right? So they do just eventually drop it. It was just, there was someone sitting on the ask all day. Just like kneeling. They weren't hitting bids over and over again, but they just had a hard time getting filled. Just took forever, right, to get them filled. So we went into single prints, and they give us a ring. This ring works better on a second low. So if these were reversed, this probably lifts. But when it's on the first low, it's usually not ready, generally. But it was single prints, so you had a location. On the smaller time frame here, you did get the ring on the second low. See that? So on this time frame, it looks fine to buy, but you'd only be looking for 8 to 10 points, right? Not surprisingly, if you draw the volume profile of like this whole thing, what you're going to find is that the volume is way up here, which means that sweeping is likely. Like a sweeping move won't necessarily turn the market on this time frame. So if that's the case, then you should be scalping long, not looking for the lows, because this is your target, right? So your entry would be here on the triangle after the ring that came on the second low, right? And your target's here. So could you do it? You could. Does it work? Yeah, kind of. Doesn't quite make it there, but you'd get 10 points, right? Whereas on the higher time frame, it really didn't set up at all. If you look, the dot here, we couldn't get a VPOC above it on a bar that's not pink, which is bearish. And so the other thing I can think about is, since I know it's bearish on the bigger time frame, and we can't break over a bar that's a dot with a VPOC, most likely red bars, outlined red bars, are probably a short. See that? These are probably a short, and triangles coming after them are very likely. You might only be able to attack here, but that's probably the case. Now here, blue dots are not being beat by VPOCs that aren't purple. So if this was green, it's probably good. Now look, a ring bar on a second low, this is usually a long. You should wait for the triangle, and it's better if this had volume and this was a plus. If you look here, same thing. Ring, volume diamond, plus on a triangle. That's usually your entry. Right? And then this level, if it works, this level becomes support. And stars off of it in particular, star, triangle up, are good for extensions. So you do eventually get to your target, which should have been the VPOC. So if I was willing to trade on the 15 tick counter trend, that would have worked, right? It did set up long. But unfortunately, at that very moment was another piece of econ. So I personally wasn't allowed to take it because it was literally seconds after econ came out here and it was like boom, boom. So I couldn't process it, I should say. I wasn't physically able to process it on the 15 tick, but it did set up correctly. I did not have a setup here on this time frame, and then when this one finally set up, it was right after econ. I could have taken it, but I wasn't willing to look for the low after losing once. But this was the better trade than the one at the open, in my opinion. We had location, we had tested under a voodoo range level, couldn't establish below. We had tested into single prints, couldn't establish below. We didn't have a trap, but we had a higher low with a ring, right? And the smaller time frames all aligned. I don't know about the 8 tick. X. So you would expect this to reject, and it doesn't. Instead, you get a blue dot, probably long, as long as you're long on the higher time frames. Although by that point, you already knew you were long here. That didn't really give you any extra hints, I guess. Other than, could you not get a VPOC below the low? No VPOCs below the low. Caused a rip. Interesting. Plus, minibar. Oh, VPOC below the minibar. I would not have expected that. So we're not going to worry about that because that didn't... I guess it was multiple tests. So maybe that's why that doesn't matter. Interesting. And then this dot here, if it's bearish, if it's followed by a purple bar, usually you get immediate drops. But in this case, you didn't. But then it got beat and reclaimed. Beat, reclaimed. You'd expect that to be bearish, right? And usually the setup, as we saw earlier, is it comes back up, it tags the area, it rejects. That didn't happen, right? So if this was slow and you could use, I wouldn't recommend taking trades on the 8 tick of NQ. It's just too fast and too much noise. But when you see a setup like that usually works and it doesn't, well, now I can go in the higher time frame and be like, well, does it make sense that we're going to be long here? It's like, oh, wait, that trade worked on the 15 tick. That's usually support. Oh, it's setting up for long on the 24 tick. I will take it, right? That's the way I'm supposed to be doing it. It's just that this all happened in like 7/10 of a second because of econ. But it's cool to see that it actually does work if you do it right? There was no way I could physically do it. But had I like programmed that whole thing into a computer, I technically could have taken the trade and it would have worked. I just didn't get a chance. The target is the VPOC, which is hit right here. But then since it's bearish, see this level, remember? It's the same spot, right? It's this, which we knew to be watching, right? Was it here that we talked about that? Nope, it was on this time frame, right? Or was it on this time frame? Nope, it must have been here. What did we say about that level exactly? And why is it? Oh, is it just this high? Yes, that's right. I said that that is the rejection of the dot that got beat and reclaimed. So that's that setup. That's the setup that didn't show up. It didn't show up. Whoops. Where was that? Later. It didn't show up right here. Dot, beat, reclaimed, no sell, bullish, right there. Right, and on the 24 tick, you're still getting the notification here that it's like, oh, it's time to go. So anyway, they go up, and so we can watch for that again, see if it shows up again, because that is pretty consistent. All right, so that would have gotten you long to here. I missed it. They then turn around right at resistance, right? They just flipped it. And if you were watching that level, probably could have taken the orange bar. And then here is the arrows again, right at resistance, showing up, right? And that's what I've been noticing, particularly with that specific trade where it's dot, beat, reclaim, retest. So on a bigger time frame, that's it. Oh, that just made me think, I wonder if I have to find the arrows on a smaller time frame. That's an interesting idea. That might actually be something to look into. If that setup goes, do I look for the arrows on a smaller time frame to confirm? But anyway, I did not catch that trade, unfortunately. I could have taken it here on the dot because we beat an X bar with the trend and the prints a dot. So that's an okay trade. And then plus dot. This is going to get very repetitive because it's literally the same thing over and over again. Dot, beat it, reclaimed it. Right there. That's the reclaim, right? It looks late because it looks like you're selling right into support. But I could have taken it. And then I'm sure it probably set up here too. Just this one. I don't think it counts when it's this far away. Dot, beat, couldn't reclaim it, bullish. Reclaim would be here. So if they retest it and hit dot, it's down. Okay, it works on this time frame. There, that's probably better. And see, there's the arrow. That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. Okay, so that seems to work. Okay, here's an exit below. Very dangerous, right? So we're going to be watching for this dot to get beat and see if this area can become support. And they can't beat it, right? So this is really bearish if they can't beat that, and they can't. It's just, I don't have a setup here. Oh, maybe I do hold on, maybe I do. I didn't think about the purple bars. Would there be a way, it didn't retrace, did it? Not really. Did it retrace here? No, and there's no hammer purple bars, they're all mini bars. So this mini bar gets VPOX below it on bearish bars, meaning it's probably bearish. That's normal, right? So wherever resistance is, it's probably going to hold. Do arrows work there? But this does, I bet. Second ring, right? So this is a high. Second high. Ring. Now there's no volume here. That kind of sucks. But triangle down if you want to be sure. And an arrow. And it just falls away. So that did work on that time frame. Interesting. So another setup we talked about yesterday. When you have purple bars, I think I talked about it in the opposite direction because it was bullish, but purple bars that are that are like inverse hammers, right? You expect these to produce, to get bars beyond them. So like this is what you expect. And once that occurs, the resistance here should continue to be defended. It doesn't matter. They don't even get it there. So that's the problem with the short side. They don't often give you the big retraces on the 24 tick. So it just didn't have a lot of opportunities. And this one didn't set up at all. And I mean, this did, but I'm not going to trade off of that. But this is looking bearish for sure. Okay, here, dot. Beat it. Reclaimed it. Is there an arrow on a smaller time frame? Let's see. Did we get a yellow arrow? We did. Okay. Cool. Neat. Okay, anyway, it just falls away. I think I got a piece of it. Now this, we know this setup, right? This dot on a tiny little mini purple bar, it's usually really bearish, but blue, right? Blue outline means overextended, we need rest. So if they can beat this with a pink bar, it's usually coming back to resistance. Oh, and they can't. So they just keep going. Well, that's bullshit. So this one, I'd be watching for too. It's blue, right? Hammer. We get an arrow below it. We get a bar below it with the VPOC below it. That should be resistance, and it is. And the red bars start to work. You just kind of had to be a little bit aggressive here to catch this. Okay, blue mini bar. No dot, but it does get beat. You can see I was trading this. So here you got box, right, on a speed bar. Speed trap, I mean. And this one had an X in it. And I had mentioned a while ago that X that's followed by box has the potential, if it's positioned correctly, to give an immediate drop. And so here I wait for this bar to print, and I prefer that it be purple, like this. And then it can get an immediate drop. So I caught that one. And then I think I got caught along here too, because it was pink bar, not pink bar, with VPOC above the high of this mini bar. So right away it's like, oh, well, that's not bearish unless they beat that. So if you mark this and say, well, that's my support. So if I can get a setup anything above that or a retest of it, it's probably good, right? We did beat the yellow dot. So we have to watch for reclaims down here. But other than that, it should be bullish. Now here they didn't come back and tag it right away. But they gave us the box going in the opposite. It's the exact opposite of this, right? Triangle up. Not pink. So these are in the wrong order. We want this one to be white and this one to be pink. And that, if it's not pink, and plus they didn't break through resistance. You want that next bar to break support or resistance. And it didn't. So there it's like, oh, and then they do it again, X, right? So now this level is going to get defended. If it retraces, that's where you really want the short. But instead they give purple bar down. Now I should have waited until this broke because of that. But I believe I took that trade. I kind of remember that. Yeah, so that sucks. I should have waited. I got to wait for the... Yeah. And then knowing that this is support, it doesn't get there, but you want that to hold. The other thing that I'm noticing, hammer bar produces a VPOC above it. That level is now support. We know blue dots from that level probably produce lifts. Blue dot, right? So thankfully I knew to flip here, and I knew it to do it relatively fast. So I took like a very small loss here and flipped it. Then it hit old resistance right off of this hammer bar, which we should expect to act as resistance. So that's a great time to exit. Then you get pink bar, orange bar. Did we have a mini bar at the top that didn't get broken over? No. Darn. What about on the higher time frame? No. So probably not a place to short. Nice. Okay, and then they hammer it here. Now, you could say that this is a second high. It's hard to see, but it's got a ring on it. That's a pretty good short. You can wait for the triangle down. Oh, no triangle down. And it still freaking works. Okay. It's got an X, a star, and a ring on it. Pretty strong. On the higher time frame, this is the first high, but it's right at resistance. Ring, triangle down, that's purple. That's usually how they set up. It's just you wanted a second. You want to get a second one first. So it might not be ready to drop on a big time frame. You can see here, box, pink bar. Does that get a VPOC above? It does. You'd expect them to defend it. That doesn't work. Right? So that's interesting. So even on the 24 tick, it's the longs aren't working. That's what it should tell you. Right? On the 15 tick, they're working. On the 24 tick, longs aren't working. We're running into resistance. And you shouldn't be trading counter trend. This is why hunting bottoms is not a good idea. Right? So if you just stick with the short side, you might miss this, but you could get any of these on the smaller time frame, particularly. Did we reclaim it after losing a blue? I want to make sure that doesn't happen very often. Blue got lost here. And then it acted as resistance. That's cool. Yeah, and then yellow got lost. Reclaimed on a purple bar. You have to wait for the retest and the rejection. And then preferably an arrow, perhaps on a smaller time frame. Yep. That's cool. I like that. So here the arrow is not on the second high, but if you look over here, it is resistance. So it still makes sense that it works. All these purple bars got me freaked out. I didn't want to short it. Probably should have. Right back into support, and it just rips right through it. This dot, if it's bearish, usually produces resistance. Sometimes an immediate rug pull. But see all these purple bars, purple, 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 that's usually a sign that you need to like rest. The trend probably, and look, you can't get a bar that's not purple underneath this support. So that's a problem. And again, that support is this pink bar. That's a hammer, and we traded above it. You expect them to defend it. They do. They can trade under it, but they should defend it. So if you were looking for a long, that's your first long right there. And what do you know? It's a... Oh, never mind. Not a second low and no triangle up. It's toast. So it's only on the small time frame. It does work on the small time frame, which is where that low came from. That makes sense. So higher time frame, it's bearish. You can't. This is the same mistake I made this morning. You can't expect the higher time frame to conform to the lower time frame. It only goes the other way, right? Did you have a hint here that was happening on this on the smallest time frame? See, look, X gets trapped. This is the risk of using a smaller time frame. If it's bullish on the higher time frame, this is a sign that it's ready to go. It's bearish on the higher time frame. It's not going to work. See that? That fails. Because the higher time frame is bearish. So if you're trading bearish, it's fine, but you can't. Yeah, that's good to know. So then here's this move. You can see we had a hammer bar, VPOC above the hammer bar, right? We expect this to act as support. It does, but only once, and that's normal, especially counter trend. Purple hammer bar, they trade below it with a VPOC below it. This should act as resistance, and it does. So that is your better entry if you were trading the 8 tick, right? That's how that setup works. Okay, so you did get a setup to the short side on the small time frame, and you got a long from the smaller time frame, and then that short was kind of hard to take, but this one makes sense to do. Okay, so like I said, these dots with the mini bars, you can just take them. Purple, purple, purple. Again, they try to save this with that same. It's the same exact setup. Oh wait, that's the same spot. So that was the long. Potentially. X. So see, this blue star is very vulnerable. It gets trapped. We get above it. We can't get a VPOC above it except for pink. That sucks. But right here it gets trapped. So you, if the higher time frame is bullish, that should be support. It's support. And that one works. But like I said, I don't know if I'd trust it because the higher time frame doesn't look bullish. But that did catch that did find the low at the time. You can see you got a ring on a higher low. That's usually good, right? And then once it lifts that level, you can campaign. See that? That worked. Okay, here it's a pink hammer, right? And then right away we got this dot pink. If it's bullish, this produces higher, okay? If it's bearish, you get an immediate flush. But with this hammer here, you technically wanted a bar that's not pink to get above it. But if you can get a VPOC above it, which happens here, you should expect that any dips into here are bought. I just don't think they gave you the chance. Yeah, they didn't really give you much. But they did give you a dot. And then on this time frame, like I said, this now becomes support. No star, though. You wanted a star there, preferably. But then you had a hammer bar that's pink. VPOC above it on a bar that's not pink. That level's probably supported. No star here, but you got it here. This ring gets beat. That's pretty bullish. Again, this was like crawling speed, so very hard, honestly. These X bars, when it's fast and momentous, will just like shuttle off, like space shuttle, but when it's choppy like this or slow, the lows get tested first. And then you got to take this. Now this has got a box on it, so we expect that low to hold on a retest, or at least to be defended, I should say. But sometimes they don't give you the chance and they just lift. And unfortunately, this one just lifted. Well, I say unfortunately because it would have been hard to know because it was like so slow here, but this one was just the last straw. I don't know if the fact that it has divergence here and it's so high up, we talked about that earlier when I was accidentally looking at Tuesday. This is the situation I was thinking about. Like that doesn't, this dot here should be easy to break when it's not at support, and they don't. So maybe once you get dot, box, triangle up, it might be good enough just to take it. I don't know. But the dot and the box are not very, the blue divergent dot, it's not very common that you see these together because these very rarely show up in actual support. But they do pull back into it. This is where, if I remember right, I was able to get long. Yeah, and then this was a hammer, and so was this, but this was a hammer that got a VPOC above it. So now this becomes support, and this box has a likelihood of doing the same thing because it's not chopping, and it's at support, an established support. It pulled back, gave me a dot, divergent dot box, triangle up, and so this probably won't get broken. This is your traditional retest entry. I took that too. That one was awesome. And this is exactly how it's supposed to work. They put a box, they try to go, they push above it, they pull back, the VPOC or the low acts as support, and they race higher. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Now, interestingly, if you looked at this from the other direction and you were like, I think it's still bearish. Well, here's on this time frame, you would see, for instance, no, wait, that one didn't get any non here. This was a hammer, purple bar, and it got a VPOC below it, right? So we expect that high to get defended, and they break through it and put a VPOC above it. That shouldn't happen when it's bearish. So all of a sudden, you might want to flip and start looking for bear trades. Same thing happens here. Hammer. VPOC below it. It's probably not bearish. Once they break over this, you know it's not bearish. So that now becomes support. I might have to program an elbow to do that because I kind of like that setup, or at least that concept. Hammer. Oh, can't get below it. Already know it's bullish. Pink hammer. Defend. Bullish. It's another pink hammer. That should get defended. Right? Now, on the higher time frame, you didn't have a lot of opportunities. If all you were looking at is this, all you had was this hammer, pull back, star up, green bar. It's not bad, but you know, that's really all you had. And then you had blue getting reclaimed. Blue broke with VPOC below, reclaim that, and it's immediately bullish. Next, arrow on a smaller time frame to the upside, blue, should take us. Oh, we didn't get it. Blue dot though might work too. And then this blue dot got beat here. And so when that gets reclaimed right there, arrows, blue arrows should start to work. We just didn't get any. But blue dot did. Yellow arrow got beat. That's interesting. So I don't know if the arrows always show up there or what, or usually do. But this was green bar, triangle up. Anyway, okay. So then we have pink bar that's also yellow. Be careful, right? Hammer, get above it, right? That should be defended if it's bullish. See that? They defend it. Purple bar, defense. It's good. As long as it's bullish, it's good, right? Yellow dot, you can't. They beat it now. You can't reclaim this, so you can basically put your stop a little bit below that. If they reclaim that as bearish, box. It's got since I know it's bearish under here, we're just gonna have to immediately go. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. Oh, or maybe it'll do exactly the opposite. Interesting. So we couldn't get a VPOC. Dot. Beat. It did get beat, right? Dot. Beat. Oh, I don't know. Looks like it's reclaimed. Reclaimed. So now, oh, that's right. Now we would need a retest of that level from the downside, which just doesn't set up. So it doesn't clear you for takeoff to the upside, but Yeah, it doesn't. It's not a stop. It just doesn't set up short. That's right. So the other one is I forgot the retest. So it's dot gets lost. Dot gets retested. Where is that? Dot here. Dot gets lost. Dot gets beat. So I need a retest of the shaded area right there, and then dot. That's the entry. Yes. Okay. That seems to work. I'm definitely gonna look into that more. Okay. Pink hammer. Oh, it can't get beat. That's already concerning, right? Purple hammer. VPOC below. That's probably resistance. It doesn't work. It's not bearish, right? But you can see it flips back and forth in the smaller time frame. You got to be you'd have to be very cautious. But yeah, that one was tricky. That was a hard little rotation there to catch. But it did set up here. If you were willing to buy it into resistance, that's a pretty common way to retest and go. And it retested the gray trend line. So yeah. But yeah, the hard part here is like you're breaking below like blue dots and getting VPOCs below them. And usually that's bearish, right? And so when it's not, you have to assume that the higher time frame is probably not bearish. Because if those aren't working on the smaller time frame, the reason is probably because the higher time frame is going in the opposite direction. So it would mean to just to ignore shorts completely, right? Because again, like I said yesterday, these like arrows, like the triangle down and the stars down, they're going to be murder traps if you're trading counter trend. So like here, dot, VPOC under the dot, that's not a sell, right? It's the kind of thing you usually see when it's bearish, but it's got to come back up and reject, and it just doesn't. Instead, it comes back up and traps, and then you get ring on the second high, followed by triangle down. That one should work, because that's a really good setup. It also now got under blue, right? So if we would have come back up and retested that level, that's also a short. But you can see how it flipped from bullish to bearish here. And it, in a blink of an eye, it just ran into resistance. It's the single prints. Yeah. Did we reclaim a yellow dot? Not on that time frame. What about this time frame? Yes. Let's see if that setup works. This is the first one, the highest one. Beat. Oh, beat. No, we didn't beat these. Reclaimed. So now testing this area. That should be bearish. Oh, no setup. No algos. Do I get an arrow on the smaller time frame? I do. Here. That one stopped. Oh, well, not on the smaller time frame it didn't. Interesting. So it works on the smaller time frame when you get the arrow on the smaller time frame, but it doesn't necessarily work on this time frame. There we go. Can't get a VPOC above it. That's probably going to work. Oh my goodness. Nope, because the higher time frame is not cooperating. Okay. So, oh, did we have more that we needed to break through too? Is it because I used the highest one? What if I use the lowest one? Beat. Reclaimed. Yeah, they try to retest it. No trigger. Can't stay under it. Bullish. Okay. So the last one's going to be more conservative, obviously. And then blue dot would be the highest blue dot that got beat. So this one. But we could probably say maybe this one too. Let's see if that one works. Blue dot got beat, reclaimed, retested higher, right? So that works. So that one's probably done. Blue dot, beat, reclaimed, tried to retest, no buy there. Does it set up over here? Because it technically got beat. Reclaimed, retest. You'd think that'd be it, but it's not the highest one, see? Yeah, see, you got to be careful with the lower ones. Okay, so that's an easy rule. Just do the most conservative one. It's only if they reclaim the most conservative one. So in the meantime, that's going to be resistance, I suppose. What about on this time frame? Dot here. Not yet beat. Okay. Purple. No VPOC below except for a purple bar. Not necessarily meaningful. This purple got a VPOC below on a non-purple bar. This should act as resistance. This bar with all the algos should act as resistance. This one should have acted as resistance. And it did on this time frame. Doesn't mean it goes to the low, it just means it acts as resistance. You got the arrow and everything. And it got crushed. So that is only going to work if you've got your time your direction right. Like this. Bullish. So I might not want to use it for a trade entry, but on these tiny time frames, if I see that working, it can give me a hint of who's in charge. Because look, pink holds, purple doesn't. It's bullish. So as soon as you get here, you know it's bullish, which is pretty helpful because you can catch this one, right? Pink, no VPOC below, bullish, right? We're going to assume it's going to continue until that changes. Now here, they beat it, right? And then you get a purple one. Oh, can't get a VPOC below except for purple. Still bullish. Back up to here. Yep. So even though they beat this on the tiny little time frame, don't matter. They're not going to set it up because there's no sellers on the higher time frame to actually execute the trade here. Is it still bullish? If it is, this will hold. It does not. VPOC below. Now, does this one become resistance? Yep. See how you can't get a VPOC above it? So this is the first sign that we might be bearish. It's not necessarily the top, right? But it's the first signs. Now here, with a really small time frames, here pink bar becomes support. Looks like it's bullish, right? Yep. Bullish. So maybe not good enough to take a trade entry with. Here, purple. If that's resistance, it's bearish. Oh, I missed this one. Pink. Goes higher. If that's support, it's bullish. It's not support. It's beat. It's probably bearish. This one and this one. It needs a VPOC below. There. VPOC below them. So that should act as resistance. And it does. So it's probably bearish. Yep. That's the way to think about that. Okay. I can make that adjustment. Here's how I did today. I unfortunately the PA accounts were the smallest ones. So one of them lost 422 and one of them made 220. I made the mistake of trading the PA account first and took a full size loss on it and put it away. Then started trading the Apex evaluations and was doing really good. So opened up my other PA and made with micros. Made a little bit. Some of these you can see I was trading micros because it's 43, right? So that's like number of like contracts basically. And then this one I was trading overnight too. So that's, you know, it's the, if you can see the win rate on the PAs is like pretty shitty, right? But the win rate on the evaluations was pretty awesome. And that's honestly, it's just oh, and then plus scratching trades is usually a sign I'm not trading very well. So it's not just variance, it's like emotions, right? It's wanting to be too, getting too focused on, like, making money rather than being focused on just trading on process. Because once the pressure was off, I did fine. But I almost didn't because this one was negative. I had to take a lot of trades to make that back in micros. Not a lot, but like 3 or 4 trades to get this to work. But this one was like multiple tries with micros, and I just couldn't get it going, right? And that included overnight because I lost. I had a trade overnight that was also a loser, unfortunately. So that I took with the PA. It's not a big deal, right? I'll make it back tomorrow. But the important thing to show is, first of all, I'm human and I make mistakes, and I also have losing days, right? But it's also, I think it demonstrates very nicely how much psychology has to do with this. Because if I was just staying focused and just doing what I'm supposed to do and not trying to push force trades, I know I can perform like this, right? But when I pressure myself, I start to get a 40% win rate, and the difference in P&L is extravagant. So yeah, interesting. Anyway, if a partial red day doesn't scare you away, you can feel free to check out our room. We do not win every day, but we win more than we lose, most of us. Give Simon an email, trade_perform@gmail.com. Look me up on